Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Prasad. I'll be your host for this meeting today. And on behalf of the Bay Area JK Dialogue Group and Ohio Retreat, I extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us for this exploration with Professor Krishna. We have nearly 190 participants from 19 countries, though not all of them will participate simultaneously. It's clear that there is a deep yearning for this kind of exploration, and I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to take this journey with you all together. And I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Krishna.
19 ਕੰਟਰੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ
So,
19 ਕੰਟਰੀਆਂ ਦੇ
I'll mute everyone.
Yeah, please mute everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, I extend
You'll
my.
have to unmute. You will have to unmute in just 1 minute. Okay. Okay. So unmute. Unmute. There you go.
Okay, there you go. Okay. So I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Krishna for his generosity in sharing his time and wisdom and agreeing to be our guide on this journey that we're going to undertake. I also extend my thanks to Ulrich Brugger of Ohio Retreat. Ohio Retreat, our partner, in hosting many of our series with Professor Krishna, including this one. Quickly, I want to go through some logistics. Will be very brief. And allow me to introduce Donna Feder, who will be co-hosting this meeting alongside with me. Please feel free to reach out to either one of us via chat or DM if you have any questions or suggestions about how the meeting is going. So in terms of the format of the meeting, for all the things, for all the series, Professor Krishna will provide a summary of the sections that are covered in that particular session. It will last approximately 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll open the floor for a Q&A session. And due to the large amount of participants, questions will be accepted only in written format. So please submit your questions via chat after Professor Krishna is done speaking, because some of your questions may be answered when he is speaking. After he completes his speech, maybe you don't need to ask that question. And Saeed, I think Saeed is here. He is going to be coordinating our question and answer, reading question in the order they are received. And if your question is not answered, do not worry that we will collect all the questions and share with Professor Krishna, and his answers will be sent to everybody. So one way or the other, your questions will be answered. And to ensure clarity, all participants will be muted except for Professor Krishna and any designated speakers. Also, please note that these sessions are being recorded for future dissemination. This marks the 5th year of our group organizing a lecture series with Professor Krishna. Those who have attended this series in the past are likely familiar with Mr. Rao Agastya. While some of you may already be aware, others may not be. So with great sorrow, we share the news of Mr. Rao's passing on February 3rd, 2024, after a courageous battle with cancer. He was a man of remarkable integrity and passion, inspiring and challenging all of us to approach case teaching with the seriousness it demands. We are deeply grateful for his contributions to this group. We miss him dearly, and we dedicate this series in his honor. Many of you are familiar with Professor Krishna, while some of you may be attending for the first time and may not know him well. Therefore, I have invited Dr. Constance Jones to say a few words introducing Professor Krishna. Dr. Constance Jones is currently a sociologist of religion at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Her research interests include spiritual teachers and the evolution of new religious movement around the world. She is the author of several books, including Encyclopedia of Hinduism, along with J.D. Ryan, and there is a book that is currently in press, which is maybe of particular interest to our community. It is called Krishnamurti, Self-Inquiry, Awakening, and Transformation. And we look forward to the book's release. Dr. Jones also served as visiting scholar in Department of Religious Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and as a Fulbright scholar at the Krishnamurti Research Center and Banaras Hindu University in Varanasi, India. So, Dr. Jones, please, the floor is yours. Please introduce Professor Krishna. I'll try to, let's see.
You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prasad. I think the first thing I should do is thank Prasad and the Bay Area Meditation Group, as well as Ulrich and the Ojai Retreat Center for sponsoring these webinars, seminars, series. I think my first series with Professor Krishna was in the late 80s, and then in Adyar in the early 90s. So I've taken advantage of every seminar I could. It's always a privilege to be in the presence of Professor Krishna. You probably know him as well as I do, but I do want to remind you that he is a very well-rounded scholar. He's a scholar in his own right in his field of physics, and he brings that scientific background and understanding to another great depth and breadth of understanding of the humanities when he describes what Krishnamurti was teaching. And from my humble opinion, he is the person on earth who represents the notions of Krishnamurti the best. So we are privileged indeed to learn from him tonight. I also want to say that he has encouraged, as a good scholar would do, as a first-rate scholar would do, he's encouraged other scholars such as myself to come along, and he's given us a boost. He's always been a helpful editor. He's always been an open heart, and he's been a very good listener for all of us who tried to say something about Krishnamurti in our own fields. So not only is he a scholar in his own right, and not only can he represent the teaching of Krishnamurti, but he is an embodiment of the values that Krishnamurti speaks of. And I have seen it firsthand, and it is always a joy to be in the presence of that embodiment. So thank you once again, Professor Krishna, for being so open and caring and graceful with your delivery. We will learn from you, and thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Connie, for that very kind introduction. I wish I can live up to all that you have said. I will try. In these first three pieces, which we are discussing today, Krishnaji points out that what we call as love in society is not real love, and describes what he thinks is real love. That is a state of being in which there is no trace of self-interest. And we don't know that. What society considers as love is often mixed up with desire or sex or admiration or possessiveness or attachment, all of which are rooted in self-interest. And love is where the self is not. That's how he defines true love. Where self-interest is not functioning. In that relationship is a relationship of love. And he links that to death. Not the death as we know at the end of life, the ending of the body, which is just part of nature, but dying to all our conditioning, our past, our psychological accumulations of hurts, and living in the present. That's dying before physical death. And he says that unless we die every day to whatever we have accumulated and approach the next day with fresh eyes and a fresh mind, we are trapped in a prison of our own making. That prison is the prison of conditioning, and the attachment to that conditioning and identification with that conditioning creates the ego, the me, which is not part of nature. It's simply a construct of our own thoughts. So it is important, if we want to discover what really love is, we have to discover what it means to die every day, to all this accumulation. Now that's what he says. But he also says that we should not accept what he says. Because if we merely accept what he says on his authority, then it just becomes a piece of knowledge about what Krishnamurti thought or said or perceived. And that's not the truth that we ourselves perceive. So it's important to listen to it, but not accept, nor reject it, but to stay with it and explore it in our own daily life. That's what his teaching requires. To approach it with a learning mind, which is not the accumulative learning we have had in school and college and so on, which comes through books, but through discrimination of what is true and what is false. Not through analysis and through thought, because thought is a product of memory, and memory contains all our conditioning and all our past. So thought cannot take you to the unknown. It operates within the field of the known. Do we have another instrument which we can use? And he points out that there is this capacity for awareness. It's not a thought capacity. Awareness and observation are capacities independent of thinking. They may be influenced by your past and by your thinking, but in themselves, they are independent. They are not the product of thinking. So if one uses awareness without bringing in judgments, likes and dislikes, which are all a product of one's own cultural conditioning, then it is possible to be objective in perceiving ourselves and the way our consciousness operates. And in that process, one may chance to come upon a deep insight which reveals the truth and ends the illusion in the mind. It is these illusions created by the ego, which operates at various levels in many subtle ways, which creates the disorder in our consciousness in the form of negative emotions. And that disorder then manifests in our relationships, and millions of such relationships constitute society, and therefore we contribute to the disorder in society. That's how I have understood him when he says that you are society. That is, if we are not free of our conditioning and the content of our consciousness, then we contribute all this disorder which is there within our consciousness to society. So if we have, for instance, violence, then each one of us contributes violence in our relationships in different forms, sometimes more aggressively, sometimes very subtly. And millions of billions of such relationships create a sea of violence within which there are storms like what's going on right now between Israel and Gaza in the Middle East, sometimes in Kashmir, sometimes in Los Angeles, in different parts of the world. And we object only to the storms, but we don't object to the sea which we ourselves are creating, in which the storm occurs. So he points out that each one of us is responsible for everything that is taking place in the world. Although we think only the people immediately connected with those manifestations are responsible. Of course, they are responsible, more visibly so, but we have all contributed to making them what they are. This is a somewhat difficult idea to grasp. So I will give another instance. When Mahatma Gandhi was murdered in 1948, January, Krishnamurti was giving talks in Bombay. And someone asked him at the end of his talk, "Sir, who was responsible for the murder of Gandhi?" And he said, "Each one of you who is divided from his fellow man on the basis of language, on the basis of religion, on the basis of gender, is responsible for that murder. Of course, the law caught hold of the murderers and hanged them in due course. But the deeper question is, what created those murderers? They were not born murderers. How did they become murderers? They were part of this society. They grew up in this society, accumulated the prejudices which exist in this society, to which each one of us has contributed. Unless we have freed ourselves of that contribution, we are guilty of that crime. It doesn't appear so, but when you examine deeply, that's what he was pointing. He didn't say only Godse was responsible for the murder, the man who pulled the trigger. He said each one of us who are divided on the basis of religion and so on from fellow men has contributed to that world. So he always gave very deep answers like that, which made you think. And so he points out that we don't know what love is so long as we live with self-interest and ego. So it's important for us to probe into what love is. He describes it, of course. He says, when you have this love, which is not tainted by self-interest, then you feel a sense of affection for everything and everybody. It has no cause. It's a state of complete order in consciousness. And love is that order in consciousness. It's a state of being. It's not directed towards any one person or one thing. It's towards everything around: nature, mountains, trees, animals, human beings. That includes criminals, the violent man, because he needs compassion too. If you understand the causation which has made him what he is, then you feel compassion for him. But when you see only the external deed that he has committed, it brings that partial insight, brings hatred towards that individual. So you feel one with everybody and everything around. I'm reminded of a short prayer which Annie Besant wrote, which in the Theosophical Society, in many gatherings, they repeat, which is very profound. She said, "O hidden life, vibrating in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels one with thee know also that he is one with every other." So that's what the nature of true love. It embraces all in oneness. And Krishnamurti, as you must have read in the biography, felt this in 1922, first time when the process started. He felt one with everything around. And that experience transformed him. So he gives very deep significance to what really love is, and says that because we don't have love, we have all these problems. If we had love, you would have no problems. I remember that in 1985, during his last visit to Varanasi, he said to me one day, "Sir, all the sorrow in the world is because we have never loved from the bottom of our heart." Of course, he meant this kind of love, not the love where we say, "I love ice cream," or "I love the way he plays soccer," or "I love the way he sings," and or sexuality and so on. In all that there is self-interest, there is pleasure, which I derive. There is a motive of self-interest in all those, in attachment, in dependence on another. So the question arises, whether one can do all activities in life without the self. And he said, the religious mind can do all work. By that he meant a mind which has freed itself of self-interest. The religious mind can do all work. It will change the way that work is done. So it has not to do with what you should be doing and what you should not be doing, but the motive with which you are approaching life. The self-interest comes in the motive. If that motive of self-interest is not there, then you are approaching life with love. And love is a sensitivity which is ingrained in us. It is destroyed by the ego, by the self-interest. So we need to examine that. What is this ego? Is it part of nature? Is it like our body, like our stomach or lungs or heart and so on, a part of nature? Or is it simply a construct of my own thoughts or my own approach to life? That question we need to examine. Because if it is part of nature, you can't get rid of it. You can only then discuss what is our relationship with it. What is our responsibility towards it? But he points out that it is completely a construct of our own thought, that it doesn't exist in nature, in reality. It's therefore an illusion. And because it is an illusion, it can be ended. And therefore the source of all disorder in consciousness can be ended. And then you come upon this state of complete order. That state is a state of dying to all the past. The greatest human beings in history have been those who have died to the past. Jesus Christ grew up as a Jew. The Jews believed an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He died to that, and he came upon the statement which he made that you show your other cheek also, meaning don't retaliate violence with violence. The Buddha grew up as a Hindu with casteism, with all those rituals, prayers, and philosophy of Hinduism, walked out of it. said all this worship, this animal sacrifices and so on are completely unnecessary. You have to understand yourself, you have to come upon self-knowledge, and that self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. Krishnamurti's teaching is very close to the Buddha's teaching, not the Eightfold Path which Buddha gave for the man who is not interested in a religious life, but in a life of an ordinary householder. Krishnamurti never gave two teachings, one for the householder and the other for the religious mind. But Buddha's teaching for the monks is the same, more or less the same as the Krishnamurti's teaching. So what does it mean to die to the past, to die to the conditioning? And what is the ego? There is no ego in nature, neither in the trees, nor in the animals, nor in the mountains or rivers. There is no ego. Only in the human consciousness is the ego. So it's not a product of nature. It is something we have created ourselves, and we need to learn not to create it. How does it come about? A child is born without the ego. The infant has no ego. As he grows up and acquires knowledge and capacity for thinking and so on, he soon discovers that when he has a fall, he feels the pain. His mother and his brother and so on, they don't feel the pain. So you learn that I am a separate individual, separate from the other. And he is very dependent, he or she is very dependent on his or her parents and their home, because they can't manage their life on their own. The young one of an animal becomes independent of parents in 3 months or 6 months, but not so the human child. It takes 20 years before the child becomes independent and can manage their life on their own. So there is this long period in which he needs a home, he or she needs a home and parents. All this is not what Krishnamurti has said. This is my analysis of how the ego comes about. Because unless we understand how it comes about, how do we free ourselves? So there is naturally this attachment for physical security. Not psychological security, but physical security. The child needs this attachment. It's there in the animal too. The young one of an animal clings to its mother. So that dependence is there to begin with. And therefore every child necessarily acquires this ego in the form of attachment to his own home, his own parents, and his own family. The question is, are we then permanently trapped in this state of dependence, or can we outgrow it as we grow up? Just as you wean the child away from the mother's breast after a certain age, can we wean ourselves away from this dependence? Not the end of relationship, but the end of dependence in that relationship is the ending of attachment. Concern is not attachment. So we have to understand also deeply what relationship is and how there can be love in relationship, care and affection without dependence, without attachment. So it has many very subtle ramifications, and that's why he suggested watching ourselves in daily life without forming opinions, without judging, condemning, justifying, and so on, which is all an activity of thought. It promotes the ego. Just watch in order to learn with a learning mind. The learning mind has no conclusions through which it is looking at things or not judging. It has questions, and that's the value of Krishnamurti. He raises all these questions about our life. But the exploration is our own. If we take his exploration, it's not our exploration. We have to come upon those perceptions that he came upon in order to free himself. So you can't get this from a book or from including his book or from a teacher or a guru. So he denied the role of the guru. He said, you have to be a light unto yourself. You are yourself the teacher and you are yourself the taught. One has to understand all this in understanding how to approach his teaching, not to create that into an authority. He's really asking us to inquire into our own life and learn about ourselves through our own perceptions and awareness, and not through his book. He often said, the teaching is not in the book. The entire purpose of what I say is to make you realize the need to understand yourself. And that understanding, not through analysis, not through thought, but through attention, observation, awareness. That is the nature of the learning mind. And he said that learning mind is the true religious mind. Next week, we'll take up the first talk. I think it starts at page 111. And where he discusses what is a religious mind. It's connected with these chapters because he regards religion as the quest for truth and for the ending of disorder in consciousness. That's also the way you have to probe into love. He says you have to negate whatever love is not. Love is not jealousy. Love is not attachment. Love is not dependence. So you have to eliminate all that in your consciousness in order to come upon a state which you can firsthand sense as the state of love. Otherwise, you are merely throwing out words and descriptions of that state. You are not aware of that state. So it's complex and it is difficult. And that's why he said, enter into this quest only if you are serious. If you are not serious, you just take to it casually as an intellectual pastime, it will burn you. Another day, perhaps, we can discuss that. How half understanding of Krishnamurti can be dangerous. He's really triggering a deep inquiry into ourselves and saying that that is the purpose of his teaching, to hold out a mirror to our consciousness and the way it functions, so that it can help us to look at ourselves But we have to do the looking. We have to pay the attention, not only to his teaching and the time we discuss all this, but throughout the day, as our consciousness manifests in all our relationships, relationships to ideas, ideologies, nature, body, mind, everything. So friends, I'll end it here and we can have some questions and discussion connected with this.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. And do we want to take a 5-minute break?
Okay,
Okay. So now you can write your questions in the chat, and Saeed is here. He is going to read those questions, and those who want to take a break, we'll be back in a few minutes.
So Prasad, are we saying 5 minutes? Just so
Yes.
people know what you mean
Yeah,
by a
yeah.
few minutes? 5 minutes?
Yeah,
Okay.
5 minutes, yes. Okay, I guess we can start. Syed,
Yes,
going to spotlight. Very
great.
well.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear
Great.
you.
First and foremost, Professor Krishna, it's an honor to see you again, sir. Sorry I was late.
Yeah.
You're very inspirational to me, and I am honored to be here. We are going to read from Pradeep Rakesh, who says, this state of love, agelessness that Kay describes, your sharing motivates the ego to start another becoming journey to achieve this state, a paradox to examine, egoless, not agelessness. Seemed like a comment to me, this state of love, agelessness that Kay describes, you're sharing, motivates the ego to start another becoming journey to achieve this state. A paradox.
I understand the question.
Great.
Freedom is not an achievement. It's a byproduct of learning. And the learning itself has to be done without the ego, which means without an end in view. If one is doing the learning with an end in view, it becomes a desire process or an ego process. And through an ego process, you cannot come to the ending of the ego. So it's very subtle. One has to understand that all real change is a byproduct of learning. This learning, which is known as self-knowledge, which is the discernment of what is true and what is false. What is the product of our own thinking, our own approach, and what is part of nature, a reality. When you discover that, the illusion ends. And the disorder is always created by the illusion, not by the fact. So it is really not an achievement, but we have been trained to do everything for an achievement. That approach itself is an egoistic approach. When we go to play a game, we want to win. We don't go there in order to experience the joy of playing. We want victory. So when you approach a game like that, the ego enters into it. And so if you don't win, you feel frustration. You feel rivalry when the other person does well. Because you are competing with him. But when you play just for the joy of playing and do well because for the love of excellence, then there is no ego in it. Then if you lose, you feel, you compliment your friend who won. You say to him, I want to play more, I want to learn from you. So the entire attitude changes. When you approach it egoistically with the desire to win, if he falls down, or if the umpire doesn't notice a mistake which you made, you feel happy because you will now win. All these negative emotions enter into the game. But if you don't approach it like that, they don't enter into the game. So the ego is not in the game. The ego is in the motive with which you are entering or the approach to the game. Now I'm going to generalize. If this is true of a game, isn't it true of the whole of life? The whole of life is also a game. If you approach it with an idea of achievement, with an idea of victory, with an idea of competing with somebody else, you create an ego in it. But if you approach it without the ego, you can do everything the same, and none of the negative emotions enter in. So it's not that there are certain activities or certain work which creates the ego. Our own mind, our own approach creates the ego. And one has to learn not to approach that way, not to create. Learn means not using your will not to do that. No. Learn means to perceive the truth of this and to see the danger of approaching with the ego. When you perceive a danger, it doesn't require will to not enter into that area. Nature has put an intelligence into the system which does not allow us to court danger. So when you are tempted, when you are entering into it, you are unaware. That's why awareness, attention to the motive, to your approach is important. Not only the achievement in the game, to which we give a lot of importance, but the approach from which we are entering into the activity. And whole of life then is also a game which can be played egoistically or it can be played non-egoistically. If you play it non-egoistically, you're doing it for the love of it. If you play it egoistically, you will have all the consequences of the ego. It creates all the negative emotions, all the disorder in consciousness, everything is the source of all that.
Thank you. We have a simple but potent question from Hansa asking, can awareness come from practice?
The capacity for awareness is in us, in every human being, provided by nature. We mask it by using too much, having too much addiction and dependence on thought and achievement. You don't have to cultivate awareness. It will grow if you have put thought in its right place. So you have to first understand our addiction to thought, our dependence on thought, our approach with the idea of success, of achievement. When you free yourself of that, then the awareness expands because then you pay attention. Otherwise, your attention is restricted. You pay attention only to go in the direction in which achievement is possible, which is what ambition is. And that makes us insensitive. Because then you don't pay attention to everything. This is easy to see. The ambitious man has no time for his child because he is so worried about his achievement and so on, that his mind is occupied and he considers everything else to be a waste of time. So this whole concept of waste of time arises. And if you don't pay attention, sensitivity will not develop. You have to pay attention to the bird, to the tree, to the river, to your wife, in order to come upon sensitivity. That sensitivity is love. It can't be obtained through thought.
Thank you. Ravi Singhal says, is it possible to watch one's thought as it is unfolding, or we come to know once it happened? When I try to look my thoughts with deep attention, I found there is none. Am I missing something?
No, since awareness is a faculty separate from the faculty of thinking, it is possible to be aware of our own thinking. It is, if you pay attention, if that's the question in your mind, what is the role of thought in my life, and what is the right place of thought? Not saying thought is good, thought is bad, but finding out where thought is useful, healthy, normal, where thought is complicating, unhealthy, has no role in life. So to learn what is the right place of thought, you need to give a lot of attention and be aware as you are thinking of the consequences to discover what is the right place of thought. That's why Krishnamurti talked about the art of living. Art means putting everything in its right place. Then there is a sense of beauty that arises when everything is in its right place. But that right place cannot be defined by thought. You have to play with it in your life and discover it for yourself. To give an example, where does need end and greed begin? Who is going to draw that line and tell you that this much is need and after that it is greed? You will have to learn that for yourself. How much food to eat? When does it become overeating? You will have to sense that for yourself. In the same way, everything needs to be put in its right place. Sex in its right place, thought in its right place, imagination in its right place, the instincts in their right place, and so on. That is what order is. Order is not an imposed order imposed by certain formula or certain thought, imagination of an order, imposing it on yourself. No. That process is a process of conflict. But when you discover the right place of everything, things fall into place and create order. And the disorder ends. That is the inquiry. It's a very existential inquiry into everything about ourselves. What is the right place of body? I remember a dialogue Krishnamurti started in, I think it was 1984 or 85 in Rajghat. The Buddhist scholars and so on were there. He started the dialogue with asking, sir, where does the self end and the other begin? So even the self, he didn't completely disband it. You have to pay attention to your body, to look after it, to care for it, to your child. All that is the role of the self for the me and the mind. It's a responsibility towards one's own body and towards one's own family. But when you start using them to fill your psychological needs, or you find a father who says, I could not become a medical doctor, but I will see to it that my child does that so that he feels fulfilled. All that is not love. It is exploitation. You're using your power to fulfill your ambitions. You're not caring about what suits that child. So it's very subtle. It's not that imagination should not be used. Imagination can help you do surgery. Imagination can also help you to make an atomic bomb. So it depends on what your motive is and how you are using that imagination. So, sir, it's very subtle. You won't get to it without paying a lot of attention and staying with the question for a long time. Not that time helps you to come upon perception. The moment of perception is free of time. But it occurs in time. You may not come upon perception for 20 years, or you may come upon it tomorrow. It's not a question of how much you know. If I may take an example from science, millions of people had seen apples fall. But Newton asked a question. Why does it fall? Why doesn't it go upwards? And he had done experiments in his laboratory to know that forces have to act in order to accelerate a body. So he said, what force is accelerating this apple down towards the earth? And he came upon the law of gravitation. But the whole thing began with an observation coupled with a question. He did it just for the learning. He didn't do it in order to get the Nobel Prize or something like that. So we are capable of inquiry which is not egoistic, which is not seeking something for oneself, name, fame, achievement, and so on. Just out of one's own curiosity, one's own passion to learn. Then it's not egoistic. The desire to learn is not egoistic. The desire to become is egoistic. So you have to watch very carefully, not be against desire, but watch whether you are desiring egoistically or non-egoistic.
Dr. Krishna, you touched on this, but Renu Arora asks whether does self-service like Shiva in temples, Gurudwara, help in removing factor of, quote, self-interest, close quote, in all that you do?
No, because the cause of self-interest lies within you. It's not a question of going to the temple and lighting a lamp. You may do that. It may give you temporarily a good feeling, a feeling of peace. But that's temporary. It's not a real change. People who visit the church or the temple are not necessarily less violent than other people. You can watch that. So it becomes an activity, cultural activity which you enjoy. Nothing wrong with enjoyment, so long as you don't have the illusion that you are becoming virtuous and better than other human beings.
Gayatri Chandavarkar asks, is the learning mind and religious mind the same? If yes, what are the quality of such a mind?
Good question.
Yes, sir. Is the learning mind and religious mind the same?
Yeah, I have understood the question. I'm saying it's a good question.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you.
It depends on what you mean by the religious mind. If you mean the mind in quest of truth, then yes, the learning mind is the way to discover what is true and what is false. It begins not with knowledge, it begins with saying, I don't know. Not just saying, but really feeling that I don't really know what is true and what is false. But I'll find out, I will discover it. So your observation of life is being done with this question in the background. And that's precisely the state of learning. Observation coupled with a question creates learning. It is not important to come upon a conclusion in this field. In science, it is important to come upon a conclusion and then express it as a formula and so on. Here, formulas don't work, and conclusions block further inquiry. The answer kills the question if you accept the answer. So, but it is important to have this state of a learning mind. The state of a learning mind is that it knows that it does not know. And that's true humility. Not humility of feeling small in relation to others, but this is true humility, knowing that you don't know. And therefore, you are interested, enthusiastic about discovery.
Stephen asks Dr. Krishna, can you say more about how half understanding of case teaching can be dangerous?
Because we have a deep conditioning and we look at everything with the idea, what should I do and what should I not do? And that's not learning. What is true and what is false is learning. What I should do and what I should not do is not learning. But we have been brought up like that, so it's a very deep-rooted conditioning. If we approach Krishnamurti's teaching with that conditioning, you can come to completely wrong conclusions. You must not go to temple. You must not read books because knowledge doesn't take you there. You must not have desire because desire is a source of conflict. That's half understanding of Krishnamurti. He never said this. He said, find out what is the right place of everything in life. Not form opinions, this is good, this is bad, this I should do, this I should not do. But that has been our conditioning, and we often approach Krishnamurti's teaching like that. So if you say desire is wrong, desire is evil, you have no desire, you get into a state of stagnation, of not doing anything. You haven't come upon the energy of love, but you have discovered that the energy of desire is wrong. You have said that. And that's half understanding of Krishna. Is not said that. Your mind interprets his teaching and converts it into a new morality, saying, do this and don't do that. When the teaching says virtue cannot be practiced, you cannot consciously do this and not do this, which is you have formulated out of the teaching. That's not the teaching. Real change comes as a byproduct of understanding what is true and what is false, which is self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. It's the wisdom which is intelligence, which answers or helps you to take decisions in life. Not your will or the exertion of will or discipline in your life.
Thank you. Bhavesh asks, I understand that awareness is different from thought, but when I am trying to be aware, the thought guides me what I should be aware of, in a way creating something. And this whole process makes me restless at times, so much so that it feels a big struggle. This has happened sometimes. Also, a few times I've been able to be aware without thought interfering. My question among all is how one should go about being aware.
Simply, sir, watching. Don't try to be aware. In trying, you bring in yourself or ego, your effort. That effort maker is the problem. The ego is the problem. So don't bring that into this activity of trying to understand life. Just watch. Don't judge. Don't compare. Don't say good, bad, right, wrong. All that, because all that brings in your conditioning, your past. And will create division because somebody else will say, no, this is right, and you will say this is wrong. But if you keep watching, the learning comes from the watching. There is a beautiful shloka in the Upanishads, one of the Upanishads, which talks about two birds on a tree. It says, one bird is nibbling at the fruit and tasting the sourness or bitterness of the fruit. The other bird is only watching what this bird is doing. And the learning comes from the second bird. That's precisely what Krishnamurti is teaching. That the first bird is the ego. It is operating, it is experiencing sorrow and pleasure and everything. Keep the second bird alive. Keep the awareness alive. Watch. In order to learn about yourself in the whole process of life, without forming an opinion, I should do this, I should not do that. This tendency to form shoulds, I should do this, I should not do that, is itself a deep conditioning which prevents one from paying attention. Because you go into the realm of the thought or into the realm of the known. And whereas you have to be paying attention if you want to learn something that is not part of the known, goes beyond the known.
Jagan Sachardri asked, Professor Krishna, please elaborate on how the ego develops due to physiological dependency on one's parents, conversing to psychological dependency, and how it leads to much confusion in human life.
Yes. The physiological dependency is easy to understand. You need food and you don't have money, so they buy the food for you and feed you. And that is needed for your body. It is their responsibility to provide that. The psychological dependence is a sense of security, psychological security. You feel that psychological security in your home, with your parents. And that develops an attachment. You want to be there. You feel comfortable there. You need to outgrow that. in order to be able to go out into society and function in society, you need to outgrow the psychological dependence on your parents, which doesn't mean that you don't love them or you don't care for them or don't, none of that. Your relationship can exactly be the same, but the psychological dependence is no longer there.
Krishna and Shuman Verma ask, if ego is bad, why does it develop in the first place?
I think I went into that in my talk, but maybe he didn't pay attention at that time. The young child of a human being is completely helpless and needs for its survival for the mother and the father to take care of. That's the reason human beings have created the institution of marriage. Mainly, that is the reason. Because the child needs looking after for maybe 15, 20 years before it can function independently in society. So it becomes quite natural for the child to feel safe in his home with his parents. And that dependence, that attachment is the beginning of the ego. You can develop ego for other things as well, for your country, my religion, my property, my home, my body, and so on. You can develop attachment or identification with any of these, and it will contribute to the ego. But it begins in the child with the attachment to the parents, which is both physical security and also psychological security.
Question from Shiva, is there a subtle difference when we say thought is memory and thought is the response of memory?
No, thought is not memory. Thought is the response of memory. Thought may create fresh memories, because if you think about somebody whom you dislike, you build that sense of hatred towards him, and that whole entire hatred and that kind of thinking gets recorded. The brain is an instrument of recording, so it does its work. You have no control on that. It does its work. And that interferes. Not all memory interferes. You need memory. You have to find the right use of memory and the wrong use of memory. You need memory to have language, to communicate, to function in everyday life. You need memory. That's the right use of memory when it doesn't produce any conflict or any disorder in your life. But memory of what you like and what you dislike, memory of what you hate and what you love, what is right and what is wrong, all that interferes. So that's a psychological memory which creates the problem, not the factual memory. It is that which Krishnamurti is saying, you need to die to it. That means I am hurt by something you said today. Do I carry that hurt over from day to day? Or do I die to it today and meet you afresh again without this memory interfering in our relationship? That's what it means to die every day.
Narantas ask, what is the difference between attention, awareness, and consciousness?
Conscience or consciousness?
Consciousness.
Oh,
What's the difference between attention, awareness, and consciousness?
attention is when you are focusing your awareness in a particular area. Then we call that as attention. Consciousness is the overall term. The capacity for awareness is the innate quality of consciousness. But consciousness also gets inputs from the senses, from past memories, and so on. So the entire content of consciousness is what we know as consciousness. Now, when you're free of that content, a state which we don't know, but which Krishnamurti has talked about, then consciousness would be pure awareness, the capacity for awareness. But freedom from conditioning, this is my view, freedom from conditioning is not the absence of conditioning. The conditioning is held in the brain cells. There is no way for you to wipe that out. It may have happened with Krishnamurti. He lost his memory of his childhood and so on, but he went through some very esoteric process, which is a great mystery. There is no way. It's not like something written on the blackboard which you can wipe out. So it's there, sitting there. I mean, I learned physics. I was brought up as a Hindu. All that is sitting in my memory. But do I need to identify with that? Do I need to give tremendous importance to that as the mean? Or just be aware of it, that it is there, that it contains some healthy, useful things, but it also contains a whole lot of illusions, cultural illusions, psychological illusions. The illusion of being a separate me. All that is part of consciousness. So unless you go very deep into and inquire into this consciousness, what is true and what is false, and you are trapped in the prison of this condition. Krishna talks about it, that it's like an animal that is tethered to a center. And it has movement within a certain area, which is the known. But it can't go beyond that. So it's in a prison of its own making.
So in the interest,
Attached to the known. If you are not attached to the known, you have a certain freedom from the known.
thank you, Krishna. I read two questions in the interest of time from Aparna, who asked a short question. Can you explain more on putting thought in right place? And then Pasha is asking, Namaste, sir. I have started walking on a path of being a school teacher. Sometimes I feel this occasional inner voice that I am not fit for the role of a teacher because I have seen myself indulging in pleasure, preferring to live a mechanical life. I have read Kay's books on education and I have known the highest standards set by him to be a teacher. I feel that I cannot live up to that standard, yet sometimes I feel strongly about teaching. What am I supposed to do with these contradictory feelings?
Live with it, but don't give up. Learn about it. Learn about life. It is something that is happening in your life. It's an opportunity to learn about yourself and to free yourself of conflict. The conflict is coming because you have created an image that you must not have pleasure. That image may be false. The problem is not with pleasure. Pleasure is a natural thing. You can't get rid of pleasure. You meet a friend, it pleases you. You eat some food, it pleases you. You go for a walk, it gives you a pleasure. How will you cut out pleasure in life? Problem is not with pleasure. It's a very natural thing. Pleasure and pain has been put there by nature. It's a very real thing. But the desire to maximize pleasure, the desire to repeat a pleasure, those are our creator. Sexual pleasure has no problem, but lust is a problem. The mind keeps thinking about that pleasure and wanting more of it and so on. That is lust. But pleasure in itself is a natural thing. You don't try to cut it out. That's putting pleasure in its right place and thought in its right place. Don't create images about it and so on, and then try to fit into that image. Live with a learning mind wherever that takes you. Don't insist that it must free you and so on. That's an image. We don't even know whether Krishnamurti was free. We assume that. How do you know whether another person is free? What you know is your own bondage and your capacity to come out of it.
Prasad, do we have any time, sir?
Yeah. So we reached at 10 o'clock, but the questions that are not covered, they will be written down and sent to Professor Krishna, and we're going to share his answers. So we could stop here, sir, if you wish.
Yes,
And
I think we have.
oh, yes, yes. So thank you very much, sir, and thank you everybody for joining. For the next week's reading, Professor Krishna mentioned, but I will also follow it. I'm sorry. What is
First
it?
chapter of the third part, which is a
Right.
religious.
Page 111, but I will also send an email on that. And anything else, sir? And when the video record of this is available, I'm going to send it to everybody as well.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, everybody.
thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Great pleasure to join in. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna.
Bye now.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gonna do it. I'm just not gonna do it.